Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. It is March 31st, 2025, and just under 4 months from today, on July 30th, 2025, perhaps the biggest case of the year, some have called it the biggest case of the decade, Idaho versus Kohberger, will commence the process of jury selection. Voir dire is scheduled to occur at 8:30 a.m. July 30th, 2025, and thereafter until a jury is selected. I wanted to read from you a mock reading of what voir dire might sound like when Judge Hippler introduces this proceeding. Now, this is taken from the Supreme Court of Idaho's website. These are the approved opening statements and comments relative to voir dire. ICJI 001. You can go to the website maintained by the Idaho Supreme Court and obtain these instructions. There is no guarantee, of course, that Judge Hippler will use these, but again, these are jury instructions for both civil and criminal proceedings in the state of Idaho as recommended and approved by the Supreme Court of the state. So again, this is a mock reading. There is no way to confirm that this is what will be used. We're just going in a learning expedition here based on what the opening comments at voir dire say per the Idaho Supreme Court. We will now begin. This is the case of Idaho versus Kohberger. Are the parties ready to proceed? In a moment, the clerk will call the roll of the jury. When your name is called, you will also be identified by a number. Please remember your number, as we will be using it later in the jury selection process. The clerk will now call the roll of the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been summoned as prospective jurors in the lawsuit now before us. The first thing we do in a trial is to select jurors and perhaps alternate jurors from amongst you. I am Judge Stephen J. Hippler, the judge in charge of the courtroom and this trial. The deputy clerk of court marks the trial exhibits and administers oaths to you as jurors and to the witnesses. The bailiff will assist me in maintaining courtroom order and working with the jury. The court reporter will keep a verbatim account of all matters of record during the trial. Each of you is qualified to serve as a juror of this court. This call upon your time does not frequently come to you, but it is part of your obligation for your citizenship in the state and country. No one should avoid fulfilling this obligation except under the most pressing circumstances. Now we go to page 2. Service on a jury is a civic and patriotic obligation which all good citizens should perform. Service on a jury affords you an opportunity to be a part of the judicial process by which the legal affairs and liberties of your fellow men and women are determined and protected under our form of government. You are being asked to perform one of the highest duties of citizenship, that is, to sit in judgment on facts which will determine the guilt or innocence of persons charged with a crime. To assist you with the process of selection of a jury, I will introduce you to the parties and their lawyers and tell you in a summary what this action is about. When I introduce an individual, would you please stand and briefly face the jury panel and then retake your seat? The state of Idaho is the plaintiff in this action. The lawyer representing the state is, and it would insert the name of the prosecuting attorney. This would most likely be William Thompson, a member of the county prosecuting the attorney staff. The prosecuting attorney will be assisted by The defendant in this action is Brian C. Kohberger. The lawyer representing him is Ann C. Taylor. Another lawyer representing him is. I will now read you the pertinent portion of the indictment, which sets forth the charges against Mr. Kohberger. The indictment is not to be considered as evidence, but is a mere formal charge against the defendant. You must not consider it as evidence of guilt, and you must not be influenced by the fact that a charge has been filed. With regard to Brian C. Kohberger, the indictment and then the charges, the 5 charges would be read here. To these charges, Mr. Kohberger has pled not guilty. The indictment as to, and then he goes through all of the counts here. It would be count 1, first degree burglary, felony burglary, and then the 4 counts as to the students. Every defendant is presumed to be innocent. This means 2 things. First, the state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty. The state has that burden throughout this trial. The defendant is never required to prove his innocence, nor does the defendant ever have to produce any evidence at all. Second, the state must prove the alleged crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most, I believe, in my opinion, important parts of this entire instruction. It is the judge advising the voir dire panel, the prospective jurors, of what reasonable doubt means. Second, the state must prove the alleged crime beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible or imaginary doubt. It is a doubt based on reason and common sense. It may arise from a careful and impartial consideration of all of the evidence or from lack of evidence. If after considering all the evidence you have a reasonable doubt about the defendant's guilt, you must find the defendant not guilty. As the judge in charge of this courtroom, it is my duty at various times during the course of this trial to instruct you as the law that applies to this case. The duty of the jury is to determine the facts, to apply the law set forth in the instructions to those facts, and in this way to decide the case. In applying the court's instructions as to the controlling law, you must follow those instructions regardless of your opinion of what the law is, or what the law should be, or what any lawyer may state the law to be. During the course of this trial, including the jury selection process, you are instructed that you are not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else, not to form any opinion as to the merits of the case until after the case has been submitted to you for your determination. We will now call an initial selection of, and then the court then calls in a number of jurors. It might be 50, it might be 20, it might be 30. It's a number. As your name is called, please take a seat as directed by the bailiff. The clerk will now draw the initial jurors' names. The clerk at this point calls the jurors' names, and the jurors whose names are called are then part of this first process of voir dire. We will now conclude this first portion of a 2-part series on how Judge Hippler may instruct the voir dire panel. When we come back in our next episode, we will then continue on with how these instructions recommend that panel to be advised. This is Kathy. Thank you very much for joining us here today.